Scuba diving is a very social sport, so basically to the point where you're not even supposed to even go scuba diving without a buddy. But have you ever thought about why? So your dive buddy is effectively a second set of everything, and most importantly, eyes and hands. Yes, they have extra air that you can breathe, but you can just bring a second tank of air, right? One thing that you can't bring down with you when you're diving by yourself is something that can see a leak or an entanglement behind you and fix it for you. Diving with a buddy is great, but some people want to go self-reliant or solo diving. So self-reliance is less about, hey, I fancy a dive and just off you go by yourself. It's more about serious planning and organization so that if the worst should happen, you've already considered it and you have a contingency plan. This all starts before you even leave your home, and I cannot stress this enough. If you are ever considering diving alone, then tell someone where you are going and when to raise an alarm if you don't check in. Oh, and maybe tell them who to contact as well, so they're not wasting their time trying to find out who is the best to contact. Now, we have covered this topic in another video, so it's worth checking that one out too if you're considering self-reliance. And whilst we don't particularly recommend diving solo, many of the skills and procedures of self-reliant diving will just make you a better diver. Now, obviously, this doesn't replace proper training, and there is a lot more to diving solo, but let's take a look at how to be a more self-reliant diver. Ideally, you'd have a spare everything, but that's not really that practical. So you need to bring redundant backups for the most important things. Bring a spare mask. If you can't see, then you're just going to have a rubbish safety stop on the way back up to the surface. Bring spare knives and torches, because you'll never cut through fishing line with your bare hands, and trying to find an exit in a shipwreck in pitch black isn't fun. So the worst thing about being caught on an entanglement and not being able to free yourself is knowing that you have a knife on you, but you just can't reach it. Advanced divers will have cutting devices all over them so that they can always reach at least one of them. And remember that not all knives cut all lines. Some are specialized, or at least better at cutting through some things more than others. If it's just a single strand of fishing line, then any cutting device will cut through that. Thicker lines and nets will require a serrated edge, so you have to bring the right thing. You can waste a lot of time trying to cut through a massive netting with a tiny little line cutter. All of that time, this net is slowly wrapping around you and tangling up with more of your stuff. So bring the right tool and bring a backup to that tool as well, just in case you drop it. Your dive torch is great and probably one of the most multi-purpose pieces of kit that you can take with you on a dive. You can see what you're looking at in the dark, you can communicate with other divers, and if the ambient light suddenly shifts, like when you enter a shipwreck, then you don't have to wait for your eyes to adjust, and that's even if they can adjust inside of a metal box that light can't penetrate. So if you're in a dark place, relying on your dive torch to find your way out, what if it floods? Or the battery suddenly runs out? Then a spare torch is going to come in really handy, isn't it? Your torch isn't just there for seeing things in the dark though, it's also so that you can be seen in the dark. A scuba diver lost at sea is just a teeny tiny little blip on the surface of a constantly moving ocean. So if you can make yourself stand out in any way, then you greatly increase your chances of being found. In a recent news story, a diver was only found when a search boat was just 100 meters away from him before they actually noticed him. So a backup torch and other signaling devices are definitely a must when you're diving by yourself. If you don't know what your sack rate is, or even what a sack rate is, can I suggest that you learn what your sack rate is? Knowing how much gas you breathe can help you work out how long a given amount of gas will last, so that you can better plan a dive and make sure that you have enough gas to get back. And you need to make it back with plenty of gas left. If you end your dive with no pressure left in your tank, that's not good gas management, that's dangerous. So many divers are just too blasé over the 50 bar rule, or what is it, the 800 PSI, because nothing bad's ever happened to them, and I might as well use that extra gas. Also consider, what if something goes wrong during your dive? If you only have one tank and one regulator, then if any part of that circuit fails, then your nearest air supply is the surface. On many dives, you can't just swim up to the surface on a single lungful. You have to do one of those pesky safety stops. So self-reliant divers will almost definitely dive with a redundant air supply, just in case. Diving with side-mounted stage cylinders is the best way to dive solo because you have independent air supplies that you can switch between if you need to. The chances of both of them failing is very slim. And probably the worst thing that can happen is if the needle on your SPG is stuck. You gaze at your gauges without thinking and see that you have plenty of gas, only you don't. The easiest way to encounter something similar is to assemble your gear, pressurize it, and then close the valve whilst you put your wetsuit on, because you don't want to risk any sort of leaks or wasting any gas. You get all kitted up, check your gauges, and you've got a full tank. In you go, but 3 breaths in, the air that's kind of pressurized in your regulator has run out, and now you're testing the reach of your shoulder to try and turn your valve back open. Check your gauges often and try to notice any unusual movement or no movement at all. Try to imagine what your tank pressure will be roughly before you even look at it. If it's much different to what you've considered, then consider the fact that maybe your gauge might be wrong. Religiously check your dive gear for faults and wear. It is rare that your dive kit will fail in your kit bag before your dive. If it's gonna fail, it's going to fail at the worst possible time, and so many faults and incidents can be avoided by noticing that, this nut is loose, or that valve isn't open all the way. And it happens to the best of us. I was diving with another instructor who completed a dive with his valve open only a teeny tiny bit. They could breathe, just not too heavily. Build up your own personal diving checklist, or go through one of the hundreds of already tried and tested checklists out there to make sure that everything is fine. And check everything. The release mechanism for your dive knife, the mask buckles on your mask. Look for teeny tiny nicks in your mask strap that could rip the whole thing if you tug on it too tight when you're trying to clear it. The littlest thing will cause trouble, so if you can fix small problems before they become big problems, then you are a better diver. Your body also needs to be checked from time to time, because whilst diving can be an easy, relaxing sport, it can also be testing at times. Heart problems are standing out as a big contributing factor to scuba diving incidents, so it is well worth going to find your local dive doctor and just booking a diver medical. They'll put you through your paces and test your heart and your lung functions, eyesight and hearing, all sorts, but if they can diagnose an underlying heart condition, it's definitely worth a couple hours of your time. And I'd rather find out that I have a heart problem in a doctor's office rather than 30 meters underwater by myself. You do not want your first time that you experience rope or fishing line in the water to be when you are diving alone. The same goes for out of air scenarios and a lost mask. You want to practice worst case scenarios in a safe place so that you have the muscle memory and airway control to fix the problem at hand in the correct order. With the right practice and comfort in these scenarios, you can get yourself out of a tight situation, but without that practice and experience, you might flounder. In a safe environment, practice mask removal and replacement, air switching drills, and anything that you can think of to make sure that you are calm and collected if something hits a fan. Because you do this all the time. It's no big deal. You don't even hesitate or second guess yourself. You prioritize what needs to be fixed first so that you can tackle the next problem. If you know the theory behind something, that's great, but actually doing that thing can be very hard, especially when you're stressed and alone. And I've never actually done this with gloves on. So you need to practice these things so that you're not surprised or come across a learning gradient that you can't manage when you're all alone by yourself. So most of being a self-reliant diver is about preparation, pre-dive checks, and just bringing spares. I actually have to limit myself when I'm packing for a dive trip because I literally pack 2 sets of dive gear because what if one breaks? These traits can obviously be used in buddy diving and they will make you a more well-rounded diver, and there is actually plenty more to being a self-reliant diver, so don't just watch this and strap on a second everything and just think that you can dive alone by yourself. If you want to, then of course check out a proper solo diver course with your instructor, but until then, maybe think about your kit and what could go wrong during a dive so that you can fix it before it becomes an issue. So what do you do to be a more self-reliant diver? And do you have any self-rescue stories? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and of course, safe diving. And you'll relax more into it, and in turn will help your buoyancy because you've done it 100 times. The only thing that changes is the scenery. Shallow water is where most of the extreme buoyancy changes occur, so if you can practice there, then that's really the best place. So let's take a look at how to improve your buoyancy.